Hey guys, this is GWS here to do a Trump Promises Kept video. So, if any of you guys on Discord have seen me post, or I've even did some YouTube videos on this, there's a lot of talk about how Trump doesn't keep promises, how he is just dishonest in general, and it's like, yeah, Trump says some stupid shit, but here's the thing. There's so many things that Trump has done, far more than any other president, period. And that's just a fact. So let's go through the promises that Trump has kept. Number one, Trump is currently building the wall. Now keep in mind, he's not just building the wall, right? He's had to fight multiple legal battles over this wall. Democrats have fought him tooth and nail. States have sued him over it. You've had Texas, you've had California, all these cases, but a lot of them have been resolved, and we have many hundreds of miles of the wall already up, and more is being built. In addition, we got something called zero tolerance. Zero tolerance is the policy of, instead of catch and release, where you have an immigrant enter this country, gets beyond the 90-mile barrier, and, they get set free, they be given a trial date, and you just hope they show up at trial. Now, quite often they'll show up at their initial trials, but what happens is when they get deportation orders, what do? They flee, they haul ass. They run for the hills, as they say. So what's zero tolerance then? Zero tolerance is, instead of treating this like a misdemeanor, where we're going to give you a court date, we're going to cite you, and we're going to hope you show up at court. Please show up. Please don't run off in the middle of the country and work for some landscaping subcontractor. Please don't do that. Just please show up for your court date. Instead of that, it's like, no, you're breaking the law by entering between ports of entry. And so what are we going to do with you? We're going to throw you in jail like we would any other person who breaks the law, right? And there are laws in the books that allow them to do this zero tolerance policy. And this is a lot where you get the whole kids in cages meme, because what happens is the adults get locked up, and then what happens is the kids need a place to stay, right? Because they're dragging their kids through these hot, dehydrating conditions all the way up through Mexico, because a lot of them don't even come from Mexico. A lot of them come from Colombia, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Panama, shit like that. And so what happens is they drag these kids who are basically dehydrating. They're literally falling dead right before border patrol agents. And so they have to separate these kids and say, well, do you have any relatives that you could stay with? And very often they don't, because very often these aren't really their actual kids. They're more the more on the line of like hostages and shit, I guess. But yeah, they get taken, and so they gotta put these kids somewhere. So they put them in these holding stations, and a lot of them, yeah, they look like cages. A lot of them, some look better than others. The right wing will post the good ones, the left wing will post the shittier looking ones. But the bottom line is this: it's like, it's a very bad situation. And a bonus fact here of what Trump did is a lot of these separations were happening for lengthy periods of time, because when the parents would get arrested and detained, they would file an asylum claim. They basically say, hey, we're in danger if we go back to our own country. Can we please stay here? And that's got to get litigated. That's got to go through the courts. And the courts are already backlogged. So what happens? You have multiple months of this separation that should only be maybe weeks, a few weeks, just long enough for the trial to determine deportation. So you get weeks of that. Well, what Trump actually did, he actually did something ingenious. He said, we're just not going to accept asylum claims from people who are detained here. And so that solves the problem, right? And that had to get litigated through court, and that recently got through the Supreme Court and passed. So now what's happening is you're having these people who are detained get deported a lot faster. So even on this problem isn't even a Trump problem. This is a Congress problem. This is a problem with the structure of the laws of our land. We do not have a good way of dealing with children who are either unaccompanied by parents or who are basically accompanied by people who have no relatives here, or are accompanied, or just like basically hostages, just a gateway for the parents to get into the country. Right? So Trump has done a lot, both on the preventing illegals aspect and the better humane treatment of illegals. Because another thing, too, is under Barack Obama in 2014, we had the same problem. What did he do? He had to throw the kids in cages, too. Because there were unaccompanied children who were crossing the border, who were dying of dehydration in some cases, but they were crossing the border between ports of entry, and the Border Patrol agents, they had to, they had to do something with the kids, because they didn't know where the kids belonged. They didn't know anything about the kids. They didn't even know where they would be flown off to once they re-entered. They didn't even know in some cases like what country they came from, because again, a lot of these people, they're not from Mexico. They just passed through Mexico, right? Okay, so other promises Trump has kept. Got rid of the Iran deal. The Iran deal is a total disaster because it basically gave them all their frozen assets so that they could fund the terror cells around the Middle East. Their anti-Israeli, anti-America, anti-Shiite terror cells, including in Yemen, which was another legitimate government that just gets overthrown, and the left wing tries to justify it, right? So, you had that, and we gave them all this, and we didn't even get any guarantees of them having a nuke. It was just basically, let the IAEA inspect places we already know where the uranium is. And it's like, it's stupid, because if they were enriching beyond capacity, like, we'd easily be able to tell at those areas. So it's like, it does nothing for us. And for them to do unannounced inspections, what did they have to do? They had to give the Iranians 21 days notice. And that's just basically, covering bases, because guess what? How are you going to know where these extra sites are for the IAEA to check? You're not. It was nothing but masturbation material for diplomats. That's all it was. The deal did nothing. Obama wanted to give his buddies in the Middle East $150 billion plus money we didn't even owe them for a previous arms deal with the Shah. The Shah's not there, folks. They overthrew the Shah. That was their decision. We didn't have an arms deal with the Ayatollah. Okay? Of course, we got rid of that Paris Agreement because, well, I'm sure you guys, a lot of you know my position on climate change being mostly bullshit. If you want to debate me in the comments, right down there. And then you got TPP removal. Removing the TPP was basically a lifesaver for us. Well, our trade policy with China and with Southeast Asia is already shitty, but the TPP would have cemented that shittiness, would have taken away our sovereign right to regulate. I'm not a big regulation guy, as you can tell, but I'll tell you one thing. No country is going to tell us how to regulate our business. Nobody. That is our business, who we regulate. And for another country to be able to sue us in international court on our level of regulations, just so that we can sue them if they have child labor or some shit. No, that's bullshit. That is utter bullshit. Right? So, you got rid of that. We had VA reform. Now, more than ever, VA recipients can choose their hospitals. They can get their meds easier, and we can fire bad people at the VA. I don't know how effective it is, to be honest. I'd have to see. But Trump did get that through, and a lot of other people, they had to pull teeth just to get that through. So there's another good job for Trump. And then giving churches back their political freedoms. We've had all these 501c, all these nonprofits who have all these political opinions, right? They're allowed to talk about politics. And then you have churches who are basically put a muzzle. Like if you want nonprofit status as a church, you're not allowed to speak politically. You cannot run any ads. You can't broadcast yourself. Putting a muzzle on the religious community. That was bullshit. Trump got rid of that. Then you have ATC reform, which was more of a, like about time kind of thing. Not so much like a great thing that he did. I don't even know. I'm not an ATC expert, but that is something he did. So then you got NATO accountability. These countries who basically rely on us to fund their little socialist programs. You talk about the success of Scandinavia. You talk about the success of the UK, France, Germany, all these European countries. Who's responsible for that? We're funding all the bullshit. We're funding their defense. We're funding their healthcare research. We are funding so much of their shit and subsidizing and dealing with trade imbalances with them too, although they aren't as high as China, but that's another topic entirely. But we're funding their shit, and they're not even paying the basic amount that was asked of them. The 2% of GDP that was asked of them. They weren't paying it, and now Trump actually, I don't know if they're paying up the 2%, but they've increased what they've been paying. Then you got Usmca, which is awesome because there's actually kind of two promises Trump kept. Trump said that he was going to tariff the shit out of Mexico, rip up NAFTA, which he did. And then you got Canada, Mexico together, and we got Usmca out of it, which is a deal a lot more favorable to American workers. And then you have general protectionist policies around the world, too, not even just Mexico. You had, of course, China. Like, he got a phase one with China, which is pretty much gone now because China decided to spread their disease around the world. But he did get a phase one, and we did tariff the shit out of them. And then we put the tariffs back on, more importantly, when they reversed course on phase one. So not only did Trump get something done, he stuck with something, right? Because usually, you've had a couple presidents, like you had the, I believe it was Bush Sr. who did the basically huge tariffs on Japan. And then he went back on it. And then you had Bush Jr. do the same thing. He did the tariffs, and then they had to take the tariffs back. Trump's actually keeping them on, which is a really good sign, because our workers have been shit on, our unions have been shit on. And if you are opposed to protectionist policies, you, sir, madam, are opposed to American workers, because that's what protectionism means. That's why the word exists. The word protectionism literally means to protect American workers. Because you could give me this bullshit about comparative advantage in trade, and yes, it's true on an absolute level that trade does increase GDP, but the question is, where's it all going? You can have a paper economy all you want, but where's that money going? Who's benefiting? The people who benefit from international trade, there's two people. Number one, multinational corporations who can take advantage of that trade, and number two, third world shithole countries that have far lower standards for their workers, far lower standards for their consumers. Basically, countries, they can't afford to have standards, which isn't always a knock on them, because, if you're a third world nation, it's like you just can't afford as much. But at the same time, trading with these nations on an even platform is ridiculous because we have a higher standard here. And what happens, our companies go over there and they hire the slave labor. And not only do they hire slave labor, but they don't practice the same things that they're required, like giving people breaks, paying people extra for working more hours, stuff like that. Okay? So then, of course, you got the easy ones, lowering taxes. We can all agree he did that. He lowered them for the rich. It's like, those tax cuts were for businesses. That was the entire point. And that was the point that he made during the campaign, that we needed to make it easier to do business, and that's the point of the tax cuts. Deregulation along the same lines. He cut 30,000 pages of regulations out of the Federal Register, right? That is a lot. That's more than anybody else has cut. Ronald Reagan cut a lot too, but there was something called the Paperwork Reduction Act of 1982. So really, that was more for show, because if you cut the amount of paperwork per regulation, you're cutting the number of pages, but are you cutting the number of regulations? No. Trump cut the number of regulations without just like reorganizing the paperwork behind it. He did the 2-for-1 where they had to cut 2 regulations for every one they put in place. And that's important. And then you had fast reaction to COVID-19. Now, of course, everybody knows my position on COVID-19. Well, the Discord does. My YouTube audience may not know. But basically, COVID is a lot of overhyped bullshit. It is not threatening at all. It's about 0.5% death rate. But given that fact, we didn't know a lot of this like back in January. At the end of January, it's like we barely knew anything other than China was getting raffle stomped by the virus. So before anything, before even the media started reacting, before Joe Biden comes on with a mask and then taking off the mask and shit in his public gatherings, when he goes into churches and then he speaks at the podium, he takes off his mask and is basically spewing his shit on everybody. Before any of that, like, you had Trump issuing travel advisories, travel bans to China, travel bans to South Korea, travel bans to Italy, travel bans to Greece, and Central Europe, and then Europe as a whole. Like, he did all this in January. In January! Right? So, he reacted incredibly quickly to something we did not know, and he gave us the full month of February, basically, where we were under 100 cases, to reorganize, figure shit out, learn more about the virus, watch as it spreads in Europe. And so, yeah. And then in March, you had all the other stuff. Keep in mind, H1N1, Obama, 2009, you had 8 months before Obama would even call it an emergency. It wasn't as deadly of a virus, that's true. It was only like 15,000 dead. But 60 million people still got the thing, and that thing hit us out of the blue too. We didn't know anything. I remember H1N1. It was like people were talking about it as the apocalypse and shit. It turned out to be less deadly than we thought, but we didn't know that at the time. Obama did nothing. He did nothing. Nothing. We weren't even testing for it. So there's that, yeah. And then you had the Obamacare mandate that got removed. His record on Obamacare is kind of spotty. On healthcare in general, it's kind of spotty. But one thing he did promise was he's going to remove that mandate from Obamacare where you were forced to fund their insurance buddies. He got rid of that so that if you want to pursue an HSA, if you want to pursue some other form of funding your healthcare, you have that right now. You got that right. Without having to pay a stupid, silly-ass tax to the IRS. And then he's also gutted a lot of Obamacare from the executive standpoint. He stripped down the website where it's basically nothing. He's torn down a lot of the exchange stuff. And even the states can't, they don't have to run the exchanges anymore. The courts have basically almost finished off what Trump hasn't. So Obamacare It still exists as a formality. You still got a few regulations associated with it, but it's a shell of its former self. Okay, and then you got draw down the Middle East conflicts, which isn't an absolute thing, of course, because we're still in conflict like hell. But like, when did you see Obama or Bush get the Taliban to say, "Yeah, maybe we ought to negotiate instead of death to America, rah, blow up the White House"? You know, when's the last time you saw that? It's not often you see the fucking Taliban of all entities, you know, insane ass bullshit harboring Osama bin Laden, and all of a sudden they're wanting to strike a deal because we're far more effective. We're dropping Moabs on their asses and shit, and now they're finally coming to us. You know, I don't agree with Trump's Middle East policy. I don't like the getting involved. I just wish we'd get out. But in terms of like accomplishing your goals, Trump has done a hell of a lot in the Middle East. And Taliban, I just talked about that. So, you know, I'm sure if I thought really hard, I could come up with more shit. But that is a lot of promises Trump has kept. Like, I've been talking for... Got to get up close because, yeah, my vision ain't the best. I've been talking for over 20 minutes. And I'm just basically listing the promises. And, yeah, that's not cross-eyed. That's called nystagmus. So if anybody asks about that, there's your answer to that. So, yeah, basically, those are the reasons I support Donald J. Trump to remain president for the next 4 years. And I'd honestly vote for Ivanka 2024 to 2032. And then I'd vote for Trump Jr. to 2040. And then Eric, if he's a little bit more kind of matured in the public spotlight, 2048. And then maybe we can have Barron Trump to 2056 and have a nice little Trump dynasty because Trump has made this country so much better. I got a list of presidential rankings and Trump is ranked number 9 right now. So it's like Trump is not like a MAGA God Emperor, but he is a good president. He's one of the better presidents we've had. And basically, to all those talking shit about Trump, fuck you, fuck your communism, fuck your socialism, fuck your fucking free shit Bolshevism, fuck all that shit. Thanks for listening, guys. God bless. Hope you enjoyed.